Hi, everyone. This is Whiteflame, also known as Mark, here debating for the first round of the tournament initiated by David on the topic. And let me bring this up real quick because I forgot it all of a sudden. The topic is resolved. Developing countries should prioritize environmental protection over resource extraction when the two are in conflict. I'm here debating with Blamonkey on this topic. He's going to be pro and I'm going to be con, and the basic structure is as follows. There will be a 6-minute pro constructive that will be done by Blamonkey. Then we'll have a 3-minute cross-ex period where I will ask questions of him. Then a 7-minute constructive by me with some initial rebuttal, followed by a 3-minute cross-ex where Blamonkey asks me questions. Then he will get 4 minutes to speak, I will get 6 minutes, and he will get 3 minutes, and that's how we'll round out the debate. So without further ado, let's get this thing started, and I leave the floor to Blamonkey for a 6-minute speech in favor of the resolution.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank David for initiating this tournament. It's going to be a very fun one, hopefully. So without further ado, I will start now. My value is the social contract. John Locke was among the principal creators of the social contract we know today. Stanford's Encyclopedia of Philosophy describes Locke's formulation on government as a conditional exchange of rights. So, between the people and the state. The government is obliged to uphold their citizens' fundamental rights to life, liberty, and property. Now, my criterion is the cost-benefit analysis. The only way to determine which position better upholds the vital rights that each person is due is by looking at the tangible costs and weighing them against the benefits of a given policy. Philosophical and theoretical impacts are all fine and dandy, but they don't factor into the debate because the respective constituencies of developing countries can't experience them. Contention 1. Resource extraction bolsters despotic regimes. Slate in 2012 found that every country with more than 60% of their income stemming from oil, of which there are more than 20, is an autocracy. In part, this is due to the prevalence of the Rentier state effect. Excuse me. The Rentier state effect occurs when a resource-rich state depends on revenue from exports in lieu of taxes on citizens. In addition to limited taxes, resource-rich states leverage their immense resource revenue to buy support. Low taxes and clientelism impede democratic growth by co-opting public will to hold the ruling authority accountable. This relationship was first observed in the early 70s when global oil prices surged on account of OPEC's formation and an oil embargo. Poor nations capitalized on the surge by nationalizing oil industries and taking a slice of the profit. This effect remains. According to Ross of Foreign Affairs, in the Middle East today, oil-funded leaders typically respond to demands for greater accountability by offering new handouts, lowering taxes, or both. In 2011 alone, Algeria announced plans to invest $156 billion in new infrastructure, Saudi Arabia directed $136 billion to increasing wages in the public sector, and Kuwait offered each of its citizens a cash gift of 1,000 dinars and 14 months of food staples. Despite these token money transfers, income inequality is highly concentrated in these countries, per data from the Quality of Governments Institute and Brookings. Pritchard and Company, in their 2018 study in the World Development Journal, found a negative, statistically robust relationship between non-tax revenue generation and reduced democracy scores using data from 33 resource-dependent nations and over 20 years of revenue data. They estimated that an increase in non-tax revenue to 43% of GDP, the level that Angola had in 2008, is associated with a long-term decline in democracy of greater than 40 percentage points on the polity democracy scale. For clarity, a 40% discrepancy in the polity democracy scale is the difference between Canada, a democracy, and Algeria, an autocracy score in the 2010 dataset. Weeds and Company further this, writing for the Political Research Quarterly in 2014, and find that a 10% increase in income from natural resources in a country can reduce the chance of a democratic transition by as much as 12%. Moreover, almost all autocracies used in the paper, which analyzed data from 160 countries, experienced some sort of surge in resource income. Quality, the democracy score that I was talking about, measures the openness of political participation, executive constraints, and other institutional aspects of democracy. Reduced scores facilitate corruption and repressive policies by propping up authoritarians. Venezuela is informative here. Chavez oversaw surges in oil revenue, which was spent on programs that enamored him to the poor. However, Chavez used this popularity to politicize the Supreme Court, impose media restrictions, and get rid of term limits. Passing this resolution preserves the fundamental tether between people and their government, thereby preserving the social contract. Without rule by the people, Dictators don't have the interests of the people in mind and will maximize their power at the expense of others. Go back to my framework at the very beginning of this debate. We care about the social contract. When people are not held accountable, they're not likely to help their own constituencies. Consensus 2. Resource extraction hurts developing countries uniquely. Least developed nations stand the most to lose from the looming threat of climate change. DARA, a nonprofit that works with the UN to pursue humanitarian goals globally, found that in 2010 alone, least developed nations suffered an average net loss of 7% of their GDP on account of lower work productivity linked to climate change. The report also estimates that climate change kills 400,000 people on average per annum due to hunger and communicable diseases from crop blight and open water sources, respectively. Global carbon reliance is estimated to cause 4.5 million deaths each year due to air pollution, hazardous occupations, and cancer. Over 90% of the above mortality from both climate change and global carbon reliance occurs in developing countries. One reason for this, for example, is the lack of good health institutions. Africa carries 25% of the world's disease burden and 2% of the world's doctors. They can't handle a surge in hazardous occupations and cancer and all these other health effects. Developing countries are responsible for 63% of greenhouse gas emissions. Mitigating this number will stymie ballooning death tolls attributed to climate change. Passage means that countries prepare and stave off the worst of climate change to protect their populace, upholding the lives part of the vital lives, liberty, and property constituting their constituency. Therefore, affirm.
Start of Whiteflame's cross-examination of Blamonkey. All right, so now I have a 3-minute period during which I can ask you questions and cross-ex. So we'll get that started as soon as I set the timer now. So you talk about the social contract and whether people are helped by their country, essentially, whether the country is seeing to their needs. How does shifting to addressing global climate change address their needs?
I'm so glad you asked. So in the future, when there's going to be significantly less opportunities for crop due to crop blight and stuff like that, they're no longer going to have employment and the choice to choose their occupation, and they're also going to suffer from loss of life. Remember those fundamental rights at the very beginning by Locke? Those are specifically addressed by these climate change problems.
So what kinds of jobs are created by addressing climate change? I'm not understanding this.
Okay, it's not necessarily that jobs are. Wait. So could you restate your question? You're saying that
because you're saying certain jobs are going to go away, essentially, certain opportunities. Correct? Is that correct?
I'm saying that crop blight and those sort of problems reduce people's livelihoods. They're also not going to be able to create, say, sustainable jobs in agriculture all of a sudden because of crop blight. I mean, you can't really sell blighted crops.
So if you're in a country in sub-Saharan Africa and other countries are dumping tons of crop resources on you and depressing the price of your crops in the first place, how is that getting you out of poverty to have that sustained in the long term?
I don't see how that's applicable to the debate, but
there's continued dumping of crops on these countries. So how does a country addressing this problem address the bigger problem of access to resources that other countries give it?
So there is some dumping, but again, that's an overgeneralization. Not every developing country has access to these developed nations. Myanmar is being sanctioned by the U.S. government, and the U.S. has substantial resources dedicated to agricultural exports. So I get kind of what you're saying. You're saying that dumping presents itself a problem, but I don't see how a negative solution is going to stop that, because they're still at the mercy of multinational companies that come in and disrupt the labor and stuff like that.
So you talked about social contract. Isn't the social contract something that should necessarily require countries to do the best possible thing for their people? And not just some international need?
Which is why they need to stave off the impact of climate change, because it's going to hurt them more than any other country. It's also going to cause despotism to spike up.
Okay, well, that's almost 3 minutes, so I'll stop there. So I believe I get a minute now in terms of just general time, and also 2 minutes of prep time. well, 4 minutes total of prep time between the 2 rounds. So I'm going to take 2 of them now, and so I'll take 3 right now. Whiteflame will speak next. I'll end off there. So that's 3 minutes. So that includes the 1 minute and the 2 minutes from my prep time. So I have 2 minutes left in prep. So now let me get started. Like Blamonkey did, I'll just start by thanking everyone who's involved in this tournament, and as well as David for setting it up, and thanks to Blamonkey for agreeing to debate me on this. I think it's a really excellent topic, and I enjoy the opportunity to debate live anytime, but it's particularly nice to be able to do this with him on this topic. So I'll start my time now. It is because the greatest harm to human beings on this planet, and especially in developing countries, is brought about by poverty sustained by a lack of internal development and resource utilization that I negate on the resolution. Result: developing countries should prioritize environmental protection over resource extraction when the two are in conflict. My value is the quality of life, and my criteria is poverty reduction. Now, it is widely agreed among UN countries that poverty reduction always comes first, as it is listed as the #1 objective among their Millennium Development Goals. This should come as no surprise. Poverty is the greatest threat to the livelihoods of billions of people. As long as I better access this objective via resource extraction, it is automatically the demonstrable priority. Thus, I present my sole contention: resources and wealth. Observations. Poverty in developing countries is significantly harmful. According to studies out of the Leeds Metropolitan University, more than 1 billion people live on less than $1 a day. In sub-Saharan Africa, this amounts to more than 46% of the population. Over half of the world's population lives on less than $2 a day. And in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, more than 76% live on $2 a day. Now, this poverty kills. In the 2007 World Development Report shows that in Brazil, poverty cuts 12 years from the expected life of a young man and more than 17 years from the life of a young woman. Now, why this disparity? Well, for one, poverty leads to disease epidemics. Epidemics are a predictable outcome of environmental poverty, worsening nutrition, chronic parasite infection, and limited access to medical care. My opponent actually mentioned some of these. In such circumstances, people are more susceptible to all infectious disease, no matter how they are transmitted. Also, poverty causes war. Poverty creates an environment in which violence and conflict can thrive. The poor in many countries lack confidence or a stake in peaceful development. In poor countries that are highly susceptible to external shocks, the resulting economic and social disruptions often exacerbate or give rise to distributional conflicts. Now, taken together, this means that solving poverty is the first step in addressing all other evils in society, including environmental protection. According to the Enterprise Institute on Affluence, Technology, and Well-Being, historical evidence shows that as a society becomes wealthier and technology advances with the passage of time, it first addresses the problem it perceives as most critical: hunger, malnutrition, safe water, sanitation, education, and healthcare, before turning to those perceived as less critical. This makes sense in a world where the resources, both human and fiscal, needed to address these myriad problems are scarce. So let's get into my contention. My contention is that resource extraction offers the best option for reducing poverty in developing countries. Now, developing countries have massive amounts of natural resources, whether we're talking about Africa, where uranium, platinum, cobalt, or more famously diamonds are in great supply, or South America, which is rich in iron, steel, copper, zinc, and lead. Their predominant supply offers them a substantial advantage in markets for these resources. Now, rising commodity prices mean that these developing countries now benefit from their resource wealth. According to the UN Development Program report on extractive industries, oil and gas and minerals are becoming major sources of economic growth for several developing countries. This is a result of rising commodity prices over the last decade, advances in exploration technologies, and greater political stability in many countries with untapped resource wealth. New discoveries of gas along the eastern coastline of the African continent could be the largest the world has seen in the last decade. Minerals essential for industrial and high technology processes are increasing in value and represent opportunities for economic growth. One good example of this is Botswana, a country that has benefited from its natural resources economically and politically. The surge of wealth from resources like diamonds actually boosted their growth and also simultaneously reinforced the development of their democratic institutions. So why should poverty reduction take priority over environmental protection? Two reasons. One, when environmental goals are primary, poor people suffer. In an article by the Atlas Economic Research Foundation, it was demonstrated that the agendas of international green movements frequently conflict with and override the most pressing needs and concerns of people who are struggling to overcome widespread poverty and malnutrition, causing devastating epidemics and a virtual absence of electricity and economic opportunity. And just to make this clear, my opponent has talked about the social contract and just how important this is, yet this is this clearly sets out how there is a dynamic between pursuing green technologies or pursuing anything that doesn't cause a lot of environmental outcomes versus resource extraction. So one of the most obvious ways that this is played out is the pushback on local efforts to using sources of energy that the international community opposes. To block the construction of centralized power projects as not being appropriate or sustainable, to condemn billions of people to continued poverty and disease and millions to premature death. As poverty is reduced, environmental protection takes care of itself. In articles out of both the Aarhus University and the Cascade Policy Institute, it has been shown via empirical evidence that pollution increases at the early stages of development, but decreases after a certain level of income has been reached. As such, pursuing resource extraction furthers environmental protection. Environmental development often stems from economic development. Only when we get sufficiently rich can we afford the relative luxury of caring about the environment. This means that I garner all of my opponent's impacts in the long term while addressing the both short-term and long-term harms of poverty. Thus, I negate. But let's get into a brief bit of rebuttal. Now, he talks a lot about the social contract and how important that is. The big problem with this is that while he's trying to address disparities of wealth within a country, he's doing nothing to address the bigger issues of poverty. What's more, in his haste to use the social contract as his major tool, he's actually subjecting people to yet another burden: overcome greenhouse gases generated by larger developed countries, because it's not their fault, it's yours, that you have to deal with it. But he also doesn't really address this dumping point that I brought up in the questions. It's a huge problem because Pro is effectively doubling down on these agrarian societies rather than finding a way to build them out, rather than finding new opportunities. In doing so, he's just relegating them to the same system of failed economies that are taken over by other countries that will dump tons of food on them and bottom out their markets. And thus, I negate. Blamonkey cross X.
Okay, so I have 3 minutes of cross-X, and then I get my prep, right?
Yes.
Okay, so do you want me to just start now?
Yes.
Okay. So you talk a little bit about, you talk a little bit about dumping in cross-examination before. Is that mutually exclusive?
No, it's not, but the
occurs in both
opportunity
worlds, right?
to grow out of an agrarian society is.
Okay, but so, okay, I'm kind of confused though. Does this resolution outright prevent people from any resource extraction whatsoever, or does it say we need to prioritize one over another?
I would say that in prioritizing resource extraction over the environmental preservation, you offer more opportunities to get out from under these kinds of circumstances that dumping generates.
Okay, we can talk about. I'll talk a little bit about this in rebuttal. But in any case, so you talk about how in the long run we're going to be developing more cleaner environments in these developing countries. Tell me, how has the U.S. done in this respect over the past few years, given political factors like the EPA's politicization?
Done with addressing environmental problems?
Yes. Did they do better, worse?
I'd say it has improved, but I wouldn't say it's improved by a lot.
So we experienced a period of increased economic growth at the end of, like, say, 2015, 2016. Did we all of a sudden see a whole bunch of, like, a rapid decrease in CO2 as a result?
No.
Okay, so if climate change is imminent and it's happening right now, as I've said, we've already experienced, developing countries already experienced some of the problems with it. And how long can we wait until, you know, for these countries to develop and become greener?
I'd say the problem is if it's inevitably coming about as a result of these larger countries acting in ways that are not conducive to good environment, then it's nothing these smaller countries do is going to make any effect on that.
Okay, but isn't there disproportionate amounts of greenhouse gases coming from developing nations?
I would say that in most cases, for most developing nations, no. For a couple, yes.
Right, but when I say that 63% of greenhouse gases come from developing nations, that's quite a lot that the US and some of these other developed nations don't account for, right?
But you're not putting the burden of that just on India and China. You're putting the burden of that on every developing nation. And that means every country, even the ones that are producing very little, have to focus on this.
So are developing countries not increasing their green technology and transitioning right now?
In some cases, yes, but not in every case.
Okay, I think it's about time we're done with it. So I have like 10 seconds left. I don't want to ask another question. We'll just I'll start with I get 1 minute and then I get then I have 4 minutes of prep time. Is that correct?
Yes, you do.
Okay, so I'll take about 3 minutes, one that I already have, and then two.
Okay, sounds good.
And go.
Blamonkey will speak next.
I think I'm just going to stop at 2 minutes. I just only used 1 minute of my prep time. If that's okay with Whiteflame.
That's fine.
Okay, so I'm going to begin in 3, 2. When I get my timer up, 1, go. Okay, so first and foremost, I want to talk about the poverty reduction framework that my opponent offers, and why ultimately he's going to lose on his own framework and on mine. First and foremost, the economic benefits of resource extraction is actually limited in the long run. According to an OECD working paper, a 10% rise in oil exports reduces GDP per capita by 7%. This is in part due to the Dutch disease. So Brookings in 2017 talks about the increased demand in opportunities and resource extraction actually depresses jobs in other sectors. And this is verified by Haas and Pelkeke of the Journal of International Economics in 2017, where he shows a 1 standard deviation increase in local mining employment reduces overall employment by 1.5%. Why? Well, if there's a very lucrative sector that people need to go into, they're going to flock to that sector. This becomes a problem when all of a sudden we realize that mining activity doesn't employ too many people, but we'll get to that in a second. The important part is that Iacono of the Portuguese Journal of Economics believes that these shifts could be permanent in his models. He shows that. But the second part of Dutch disease comes from Stiglitz of Slate in 2012, where he talks about resource-rich countries and would typically have strong currencies, meaning imports are cheap compared to, because their own currencies are very strong, and that those imports compete for domestic markets. If it's cheaper to import something from another nation, I'm going to do that over, purchasing it for my own domestic market. Moreover, resource extraction employs fewer people because mining is automated. So he talks about how these agriculture dumping ends up happening. But first and foremost, agriculture is going to become more competitive when there's increased resources and people in that sector of work, and not when it erodes and more people end up going to this resource extraction projects. And moreover, resource extraction can't actually employ that many people to begin with because a lot of it is automated and operated by multinational companies. So all of these impacts that he talks about with these, they're not going to be able to. They're not going to be able to get stronger economies or whatever. That doesn't factor into the debate. Third, we're going to talk about price volatility. Oil prices are unstable, so fluctuations can doom an entire country. The Middle Eastern Development Journal in 2017 shows that Algeria's economy tanked during decreasing oil prices in 1973. And more recently, we can see entire OPEC nations fall, like Venezuela and Russia, due to falling oil prices. And fourth, despotism increases economic growth. He never really touches on my resource curse democracy point, and that's a problem because according to Rizzo and Scali of Leadership Quarterly, looking at 183 countries from 1858 to 2010, autocrats with positive effects on the economy are found at best as frequently as predicted by chance, while autocrats with negative effects are found in abundance. Autocrats also provide less employment, healthcare, education, and take on more government debt compared to their democratic counterparts. So overall, you're not really getting that much bang for your buck when we look toward despotism. And because, according to my research and my case, cross-applying my point about how it increases despotism and reduces democracy and prevents democratic transitions, you're going to be seeing more despotic governments, and they're not going to be providing the help that you need. Now, one of the other things he talks about is disease. Understand that my environmental impacts haven't gone away. We're going to be seeing more disease, especially with deforestation. When deforestation happens as a result of resource extraction, animals come into contact with people more often. And according to this journal on emerging diseases in 2017, 75% of new diseases come from animals. 60% of already known ones are from animals as well. And as I said before, Africa doesn't have the political institutions the health institutions to deal with this surge. I don't know how much time I have left.
Pretty close to the end.
Okay, that's fine. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to use the rest of my prep time as well as the extra minute, so that's 3.
Gotcha.
Whiteflame will speak next. All right, that's time. So I have 6 minutes for this speech. And I'll go ahead and start now. I think the main problem that you see with Pro's case in this case is that a lot of it is built around this entire idea of preventing despotism, when in reality, all his case does is either reinforce it or bring in other despots in the form of other countries taking control of theirs. So let's talk about this a bit. So first of all, he talks so much about how resources it bolster despotic regimes. One of the things I want you to note is that I came up with a clear example where this wasn't the case. That's Botswana. And one of the main reasons why that worked out is because it reinforced what was a good government in this country. Now, not every country is going to have a good government, and you can't force them to pick up a new government. It's just not going to happen no matter how hard you try. He's not going to suddenly create a democracy because he pursues environmental regulation and betters their environmental circumstance. What is going to happen, though, is if you improve their strength and make it possible for them to actually provide for their people, people will trust more in that government system, which is what happens in Botswana. We need to create more trust in governments in the countries where they're doing a good job. And that can only happen if you reduce poverty. He loses that in his case because he doesn't gain anything obvious to his case. The other thing, and this is something he mentioned in his questions, is that big countries like the US aren't doing all that much to address the problem with the environment, and they're still spewing out tons of CO2. Well, small countries aren't going to be able to resolve that. Maybe a couple of the big countries can do something to affect that, and some of them are doing that, but globally, we're still well above the amount of CO2 emissions that will cause an increase in the amount in the temperature of the planet. What that means is that he's not getting any major benefits by forcing a lot of small countries that can't afford it to pursue essentially a green revolution that will never actually come to fruition. And so I think and beyond that, and this is something he also brings up, he talks about how a lot of the resource extraction that occurs, a lot of how this would work with other countries is to sort of bring them in and make sure that it works with them. But in doing so, he's taking away the opportunity for these countries to prove themselves to their people. Instead, he's making it much simpler to just make the problem balloon out and never really address it. So he also talks about how climate change can cause all these problems. As I said, I think this is relatively non-unique. It's really going to lead to this problem regardless. But one of the main things that he says here is that there's all this benefit from shifting back to an agrarian environment and making sure that people can actually use more of these fields and make use of them in regular circumstances. The main problem is he's doubling down on a system that is and will continue to fail. If a country has the resources, if they don't have the means to build up a farming community that can actually afford to pay for itself, then it's not going to solve for anything. And he doesn't have a really good response to this foreign dumping problem, which he's right, is not unique. It exists in both worlds. The problem is he doesn't give them another avenue out. Foreign dumping is basically going to continue to depress these economies because people are still reliant on agriculture as their sole means of getting forward. And the big problem with that is they are suppressing the cost of agriculture in these environments, which means they can't go to the market and sell this. They have to just eat it themselves. So they're engaging in subsistence farming. They're not improving their actual economies. They're just providing for themselves, which ends up not providing enough. Really, the only things he talks about are this whole point about Dutch disease, which admittedly has some validity to it, but if the country in which resources are found is well governed, these resources can have beneficial effects. So I would say at least giving them the opportunity to improve is better than not having the opportunity at all. Pro is essentially doubling down on a system that is failing to improve these societies. And for a benefit that might not even be possible, given that other countries are in control of a lot of their circumstances when it comes to the environment. He also talks about how instability can lead to a fall in oil prices. I'd say that's true of any market. So anything he's bolstering can also lead to a major fall in those prices. And if the international community is the problem, if other affect your market, then the big problem here is how other people can affect your agricultural market and keep you out of having any kind of opportunity to increase your market. So and also I need to mention that many of these countries control the major sources of these resources, which means other countries can't really affect them. When it comes to oil, fine, that could be a major one that can be affected by others, but amounts of uranium, amounts of other resources like that that industries require to keep going, these are the countries that have them. They're the ones that can make that possible. So overall, what he's losing here, he's even losing on his own social contract, because he's failing his own people in an effort to get through the environmental problems that he can't solve anyway. You need to do more to address the poverty issue in order to address the pervasive issues with their society, and it's the only way to address the environmental issue in the long term. So I urge a vote for Con.
Okay. Do I have any time left to use for?
You do. You have 3 minutes.
I'm going to use all of it now.
Okay. Blamonkey will speak next.
By my estimation, that's about it. So when everyone else is ready, I'll begin. Whiteflame, are you ready? Okay. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to start with framing. Whether you subscribe to the quality of life or social contract, I'm going to be winning this debate for a few key reasons. First and foremost, he talks about poverty. His position is actually going to increase poverty substantially. First and foremost, I talk about in my response how people are going to get sick as a result of deforestation and more contact with zoonotic diseases. Sick people don't make for great workers. Also, I will refer to the mining industry and some of these resource extraction industries. They don't employ a lot of people. They're very automated. Multinational companies can afford automation. So you're not going to be seeing a lot of people who get significant jobs in this industry. He also drops a good portion of Dutch disease. One of the things he talks about is how Dutch disease is solved when you account for good governance. Let me ask you a question. Are all developing nations good governments? Botswana might be a one-off example. It doesn't account for Venezuela, which I mentioned in the beginning of my case. It doesn't account for Kuwait or Saudi Arabia or many of these other resource-dependent nations, which are fundamentally autocratic. Botswana is great, and I'm glad that they were able to overcome such a problem. But institutions are not distributed in such a way that everyone benefits. And there's also no real evidence that developing nations can't transition to greener technology. In fact, if there is international support, as my opponent claims, there is definitely going to be an increase toward and green energy if there is an international push. And also, let's talk about despotism. His response is essentially this. So it's not creating new despotic regimes, it's reinforcing despotic regimes. That's still a problem. Remember, I talk about how despotic regimes are bad for the economy. They're not going to be the ones that are giving employment, healthcare, or anything else, and that's according to my statistic, if I can find it, from Leadership Quarterly. So we're not really going to be seeing any of the economic benefits he talks about, and there's still going to be fundamentally a poverty problem. And also that means fundamental rights are ignored. Under the social contract, remember I said one under other, regardless, if people don't have the freedom to, if the despotic regimes exist and they're going to fundamentally curtail people's rights, like in Venezuela, as I mentioned in my first argument, that's going to be a significant issue. Second, I want to talk a little bit about climate change, and I'm going to do this very quickly. It's imminent. A 7% reduction in GDP per a 10% increase in a 7% reduction in GDP per capita as a result of climate change occurred in 2010, and it occurs in developing countries per annum on average every single year. He admits these big wealthy countries aren't going to be helping that. So it's up to developing nations who suffer the majority of the problem. Remember, they're supposed to be helping their own constituencies for the social contract to solve for it. As I mentioned, resource extraction industries depress other industries. Therefore, vote for affirmation. I'm pretty sure I'm affirmation.
Yes, you are.